Hello and welcome to Simply Neuroscience. I'm your host, Amrendra Kushwaha, and today I have with us Dr. Avishek Adhikari. He is an associate professor of behavioral neuroscience at UCLA. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's begin the conversation by a simple question. Could you share a bit about your background and what sparked your interest in the neuroscience in the first place?
I was born in Brazil from parents that are from India, and then they moved to Brazil. Then my father is also a scientist. He's a physics professor. And then I was naturally interested in science, but also he provided a lot of advice and guidance on how to go into that career. And then in my undergraduate, I majored in chemistry and biochemistry in the University of São Paulo in Brazil. And there I worked in a project that was about lead poisoning in the brain, studied from a biochemical kind of enzymatic point of view. And to further understand that topic, I took some introductory neuroscience courses in that university. And that's when I kind of got exposed to neuroscience for the first time in a more official setting. And that made me very interested in the topic. And I thought this is much more fun than anything I've learned in chemistry or biochemistry. So I changed my research scientific focus from chemistry to neuroscience. So then I applied for neuroscience PhD programs in America from Brazil. And I was accepted at Columbia University, where I worked in Josh Gordon's lab to study anxiety-like behaviors in mice and how the cortex and hippocampus communicate with each other during anxiety.
Let's move on to the next question. Along throughout this whole journey, you must have faced some of the obstacles. So can you please share some of the obstacles that you faced in your journey and how did you overcome them?
Mm-hmm. Probably one of the most difficult obstacles was just getting accepted in a PhD program in a selective university in the US, the Columbia University, applying from Brazil. That was probably the most difficult uh, hurdle. And that I kind of overcame by uh, help from a lot of people from the University of São Paulo. For example, they agreed to issue a copy of my grade transcript in English, even though that's not the language that they do their documents in Brazil. And the professors wrote good recommendation letters for me. And I also studied a lot for taking the GRE test in both the general and the cell biology specific one. And I didn't never had cell biology classes, so I had to learn all that independently. So that was maybe the most difficult step, I would say.
So while you talk like your professors back in Brazil helped you while getting the PhD program, like did you have any specific mentor or role model who influenced your career?
Yeah, so the professor I worked to research in their lab doing the lead poisoning research was Professor Etelvino Becharo in Brazil. Really helped me first because he was a very inspirational figure because uh, he was born in this very small village in Brazil and they were like very poor and didn't have shoes and and then he kind of ascended from that to sheer force of brilliance and became a very internationally renowned biochemist and one of the most important chemists in Latin America. So that was very inspirational. And then he also helped a lot with writing letters and giving advice on which sort of paths to choose that might be in the future become more important and he did my initial training in the scientific method of how to design experiments, how to read a technical paper and write about it. So all of those initial things were done by close supervision by him. So that was a very big role model.
So how has your identity, gender or race, did that factor had any influence on your career in this field?
I don't think so. I'd say the identity that helped was that, as I mentioned before, my family already had an academic background, so that part helped because then I had more information on how is it that you pursue this sort of career, which if I was from another family, probably I wouldn't. But then maybe that family would be in like some other profession, then I would know more information about that other profession. So who knows?
While we talk about family, obviously working in a neuroscience could be quite demanding. So, like, how do you manage or maintain a work-life balance while working as a while working in the neuroscience research?
Uh, I don't feel it's that demanding at this stage because now the lab is already settled and the people in the lab are trained, so they can train the new lab members. So now it's much easier than before, I would say, because it's sort of somewhat self-sustaining. And then you have to apply for grants and write papers and things like that, but it's not super complicated. So in contrast, I'd say, um, like in undergrad, I was much more busy because there's always some very difficult exam that will be tomorrow, and you're taking like 5 or 6 very dense courses. So there's always an enormous amount of things to learn every week. So that was definitely, I had less free time then. Then I also had less free time, say, in my postdoctoral studies, because you have to generate lots of results in the lab sort of by yourself within a small time frame. That's so much more pressure to. Or when you start the lab, there's also a lot of work because it has to go from a empty room with no equipment to a functioning lab where people are trained and know how to do, and then things are sort of working. But then once that initial activation energy has been overcome, which is at this moment the lab's already 8 years old, then it's much smoother than before. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you actually do in your lab? What do you research about? Mhm. Yeah, so in our lab, we study mice as a model organism to understand behaviors. And the two behaviors we study more are food seeking behaviors and also threat induced fear, anxiety, panic types of behaviors. And yeah, we study brain regions that increase and decrease both uh, fear and food seeking. And we're also looking at how those two actions interact together. So how the presence of higher fear might inhibit foraging for food, for example. What is the ultimate goal of your research, and how do you think it can impact the world? Our ultimate goal is to understand how the brain controls these uh, kind of basic survival behaviors that are very important for all sorts of animal life forms, which include the search for rewards and the avoidance of dangerous threats. And uh, understanding that would have a lot of uh, importance for biological frameworks of viewing how animals adapt to different environments and such. And also, it has a lot of important clinical implications because the neural circuits that control reward seeking and threat avoidance, those same neural circuits, when they're excessively overactive or underactive, they induce lots of mental health pathologies like depression or addiction or anorexia or binge eating disorders. So it has a lot of clinical insight implications as well. Do you think that it is unethical, or like there is some kind of boundary that even the researchers should not cross? Oh, there's definitely boundaries you shouldn't cross, but um, so for example, you have to design the experiments in the way that would use the least number of animals possible for that research, and while taking the all possible precautions to decrease the pain and discomfort of the animal, but with analgesics and proper anesthesia and monitoring of any problematic symptoms and so on. So, and also we can't do whatever you want in an experiment. So everything you want to do has to be first written and proposed, and then a ethics commission has to approve or make changes to the proposal before you can do them. And those committees include like veterinarians and bioethicists and also some people from the general broader community. So you can't just do whatever you want in an experiment either. And yeah, but in the broader sense of should animals be used for research, there are compelling arguments on either side. But then, well, the alternative to not doing any of that would be that there isn't essentially any new biomedically relevant discoveries because all of those mostly start in animals first. Not all, but so some large majority of them start in animals first and then translated to humans. So then, uh, well, say if you're ideologically completely opposed to this, then if that person goes to a hospital, would they say that no, don't treat me with any methods that benefited from animal research? Like that's the uh, more rigorous position they would have to take. They would have to, not use those technologies also, and they also would have to agree that it's preferable if people had lots of diseases that could be prevented or treated from research that used animals. So it's not that if you don't do the research, then there's no ethical cost for that either. So there is this ethical cost in terms of there be a lot more of this human suffering from diseases if there wasn't any biomedical research. But it's also true that if you do the research, then animals are being used for that. That's another like cost for that in terms of the uh, balance. So there are just kind of compelling arguments on both sides. So, like, what are some other challenges in your specific area of research? Say the biggest challenge in maintaining a lab is really the um, getting funding to do the research because, well, if you can't do that properly, then the people that work in your lab kind of have to be fired from their jobs, and it's a huge problem. It's very difficult to climb out of some period where you have to fire people from lack of money to rebuilding the lab. So that, if happens, would be a very big problem. And the other problem is more like how to personally manage people that have different personalities and different goals and work in different ways. So that's also a challenge. When you talk about funds, do you think that neuroscience in general is actually underfunded? It depends on how much funding there is in the country to do things. This current system is very slow and somewhat inefficient. I'd say that's a bigger problem now than the underfunding. So to give you an example, from the moment you submit a grant to when you receive that money from the government to do it, it's like at a minimum 1 year has passed. And that's if everything goes very well. So it's very common that maybe 2 years might pass from the moment of the initial submission to when you actually receive the money. So, like, in your opinion, if you could change something about the field of neuroscience, like, what would it be? Or, like, do you think, like, as a whole, the field of neuroscience could improve upon something? Maybe it could be the efficiency or, like, the way people approach different problems in neuroscience or any other thing that you would like to change? Uh, Perhaps, well, one change would be this how the grant funding system works to make it faster and less laborious. Because it's also it seems that there's a lot of unnecessary steps that take a lot of time, which so that would be one. Another would be that in graduate school it'd be good if there were better avenues to provide training to graduate students that maybe don't want to join a research lab after their PhD. So what are the channels of doing that? If maybe some better training for them to be more competitive for those sorts of positions, that could be good also. Um, and I think in the future there's also going to be more need for computational expertise in neuroscience. So the graduate students having some, all having some basic training in that probably be helpful as well.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about this. Like, how does the technology such as computational science or engineering or artificial intelligence has impacted the field of neuroscience and specifically your research?
Well, I'd say it's opened many opportunities because uh, now there's both the kind of physical, let's say, hardware technology to obtain the recordings of electrical neural activity from a very large number of neurons in the brain, which wasn't possible before. So now you can record the activity of maybe thousands or many hundreds of neurons in the brain simultaneously. All the animals doing something complicated, so you can learn a lot about how the neural dynamics relates to the behavior. So this technology to get that data exists, and now also the ability to analyze that data in more complex, sophisticated ways is also possible, which wasn't very easy to do before either. And uh, there's also increasingly more ways to perform those sophisticated analyses in ways that are easier to learn and easier to implement than before. So it's, in a sense, much easier to learn how to program now than it was 20 years ago.
In terms of programming, and I think in terms of data processing also, like it would be a lot helpful. Do you think the AI could help us discover a lot of new things like that which were not possible or which would have been way more difficult back? What are your opinion on the topic of the
Yeah,
AI?
I think the tasks that are related to identifying complex patterns in some kind of data, which could be electrical recording, brain activity, or images of human patients' brains, like those sorts of tasks will. I mean, they already are happening, but they will even more become easier to solve and more efficient by using these new technologies. Uh, so that will allow us to maybe focus on something else that we are better at doing than the artificial systems. Because yeah, all these stats are related to some kind of pattern recognition. It seems that eventually we already are worse at many of them, and then the ones that we are not worse at, we will become worse in the near future compared to the more modern algorithms.
So, like, what do you think is the biggest misconception about neuroscience?
Mm, I would say it's that there's this famous saying that people only use 10% of their brain, which is a very well-known statement, but it has never been shown, proven, measured, etc. So it's very unclear why it's famous, but that really has no basis in reality. And if you think about it, what would that even mean? Like, how would we even know what is the 100% if everyone is only using 10? And it certainly doesn't mean that if 100% of your neurons are electrically active at the same time, that would be good, because that would provoke a seizure. That's definitely not good.
Yeah, it would be a nightmare. Like your hands are moving, your legs are moving, and like it would be a nightmare if like all the neurons fire at once.
Yes, it's just like saying if you use 100% of your muscles, then that sounds good. That's not good. If you contract all your muscles simultaneously, you just get rigidity. That wouldn't be good either. So I'd say, but no one says that about muscles, that you will use 10% of your muscles. Uh, so maybe that, which is the biggest misconception.
So far, what has been the most rewarding experience in your career, and what made it so meaningful for you personally?
Say it's two things. One is when you yourself or someone in your research group discover some new effect that no one has ever seen, and that is very exciting because you kind of now know some new thing about nature that no one else has ever um, known before ever. So that is exciting. So, for example, when in our lab we discovered a small population of inhibitory cells in the midbrain that cause very voracious eating. No one knew that before, so we were the first to see that. So that was exciting. So that's one. And then the other is when you see that some trainee in your lab worked very hard and then they accomplished a lot, and then that uh, accomplishment kind of realizes itself in some moment, like a big paper is accepted, or they defend their PhD thesis, and people are very impressed, and then see their family who's also there is also very happy. So those are also very rewarding moments.
I just wanted to ask you, like, it is not in the questions that I have prepared. How difficult was it for you to defend your PhD thesis? What was your experience defending your own papers when you are on the other side of the
Mhm. It shouldn't be difficult for anyone to defend their PhD thesis. This is also a misconception. What's difficult is to, uh, before that, when you're doing the work, to be serious and committed and be productive for 5 years. That's the difficult part. Like, because if that is done, then the PhD thesis is more like a performance, or it's not something that you should be wondering, will I fail or pass, or whatever, because that should only be scheduled kind of after you have um, worked enough to have a thesis. So that shouldn't be some moment of uncertainty. The PhD defense should be more something like a birthday. Okay. It's like more like a celebration of, oh, we did something, and people gather to celebrate that occasion. So you shouldn't be wondering, will I die in my birthday? What will happen? It's not a thing that's likely to happen. So it's basically, if your advisors and thesis committee members are working properly, you shouldn't be even at the defense unless you're prepared and everything is already well settled. Can you please share, if you are willing to share your own personal experience, your PhD thesis? What was it on? How did it work? About the defense, or about what was the work? You can say about the work and like how did it went about the defense as well. Oh, okay. So the work was um, in mice at that time. It was known that the prefrontal cortex and hippocampus were important for generating anxiety-like behaviors in mice, which is kind of avoidance of potential threats and things of that sort. And those regions are interconnected, and they both affect anxiety. So our project was a very reasonable hypothesis of, well, they're both necessary for anxiety, and both of the regions are anatomically connected. So perhaps both of those regions are kind of communicating with each other or talking to each other in ways that increase that anxiety type behavior. So the project was recording those two regions, electrical activities, in safe situations and anxiety provoking, threatening situations. And then we saw that those regions become more synchronized during high threat situations. And this higher synchrony is a very common evidence that two regions are working together or communicating together for some task. So that was the basic work. And then in the beginning, it was very challenging because it required a lot of uh, computational skills and quantitative skills that I didn't have when I joined the lab. So I had to learn how to program and analyze the data. So that was very difficult. Uh, but then at the end of the 5 years, we already had done a lot of work in many different supporting experiments. So when it came to the thesis defense moment, then I knew we had a lot of interesting data and results that, so we couldn't, like, I couldn't fail scientifically on that end. But you're still nervous because, oh, there are all these people that will come to see this thing, and your family comes from far away, and these other friends that don't know anything about neuroscience, they'll go to see it. So you want to um, present in a way that's also kind of understandable for them, even though it's a very technical subject they're unfamiliar with. So that makes you a little nervous because you've never done something like that. But it went very well. I would say people liked the defense. Yeah, the thing that didn't go as well in my PhD was the before the thesis defense in the beginning, like in the end of the first year, something like that, you have to present what will be your project to some other faculty. And then that thing didn't go very well. I mean, I passed, but not confidently. It was like barely passing because there's a lot of unfamiliar things to talk about. And by definition, you don't have a lot of experience in this because you're just starting to go into that topic. So it's very difficult to uh, argue that this topic that I'm not very familiar about is a good project. And you have to argue that to kind of senior neuroscientists who are already successful professors who know a lot more about everything than you. So that part was much more difficult. In a thesis defense, at that point, you should be one of the world experts in whatever kind of topic you were studying because you looked at that very deeply for 5 years. But in the beginning, if you looked at it for like 2 months and you're defending a thing, that much was much more complicated for me.
So, if you could offer one advice to your younger self as you're starting out in neuroscience, what would it be?
I think we had a lot of luck in the decisions and the outcomes that happened. So I don't think there's some other thing that I could have done that would have worked out much better. But I had one kind of lucky thing that happened despite what I wanted to do, which was basically like in my undergrad, my experience was in biochemistry and chemistry, but I wanted to go into neuroscience. But my background and knowledge and the types of experiments I knew how to do were more biochemistry related. So I thought this is a sort of approach I should use in neuroscience too. Which is an approach that exists. There is a lot of neuroscience that is biochemistry related, and you measure protein interactions in the brain and things like that, and that can be very important. But so it's not that approach doesn't exist or isn't good, but the issue is both me at that stage and most of the students at that stage, they kind of make this mistake that whatever is this thing that I'm somewhat familiar with, that's the thing that I should pursue more deeply, which in my case was this biochemistry approach. But the issue is that might not be the type of thing you're best at doing. Like maybe the type of experiment or type of scientific approach that you're better at doing something completely different that you've never experienced before. So, and I kind of was uh, maybe inadvertently found myself in a situation where the approach was very different. It was this approach with mouse behavior and analysis of neural data, which I was very unfamiliar with. So this is not what I would have voluntarily chosen to do. But when doing it, I found that after overcoming the initial hurdle, I was both better at it than when I was doing the biochemistry things, and I also liked doing it more. So this very different kind of approach turned out to be sort of by luck something that I was better suited to do than the type of thing I was more familiar with. So my and that kind of didn't happen to me by plan. It happened somewhat accidentally. But I can see that that's a very common misconception that people that are starting their scientific careers have, which is this thing that I'm familiar with because I was in this lab for 6 months. This is the thing I should do forever because this is the type of thing I know a little how to do. So I would suggest that they should be more open to trying to do some other more different types of uh, scientific experiments and approaches to kind of experiment and see which one are they better at doing based on their particular personalities and talents and etc. Because it might be something very different from what they're familiar with. So say it that would be. I also have another advice, which is that I also had this problem, and also a lot of younger people at that stage have, which is they are too intimidated by older senior professors, researchers, etc. And because they go, oh no, I shouldn't ask this to them because they're very important and be bad. But in reality, most people are kind of reasonably open to answer a question or help something towards some other uh, student from their university or that they have known a little.
So do you think it is a good idea to reach out to professors and ask things without any fear?
Yeah, it depends. So if it's, for example, a professor in your university, then it's like very rude for them to reply. So, and it depends what you're asking too. Like you have to ask something that is about their work, about their expertise, that is has some kind of thought in the uh, request. Um, but yes, people should ask more. Because generally, people are happy that someone is reading their work and has some interest in what they're doing, etc. And yeah, you can email either the senior professor author of some paper or the first author who is a more junior student or trainee, and that person is extremely happy that someone contacted them about their work because they're not all busy and famous and etc. So yeah, people should write more to whatever they're interested in doing.
So how does a day of a neuroscientist looks like? How does your typical day looks like?
Well, so my what a typical day would be, there is some teaching of classes and then some preparation for teaching that class. And there's also meeting. So every day I go to the lab and talk to the people, see what they're doing and what happened and what does the experiment look like and what to do. So they do some of that. Then there usually is something to be written, which could be a paper or a grant application by a fellowship seeking trainee in the lab. So there's usually something to work related to writing, and there often is some kind of like a presentation from an invited speaker from another university that will talk about their new discovery. So there might be something of that sort. And then I also do some data analysis for the results in our lab. So those are the types of activities that happen here.
What do you love more? Do you love teaching the students more, or do you love spending time in your lab more comparatively?
Teaching students, you mean classes?
Yeah, in the classes.
In the classes, what I like the teaching part, but what I don't like in the class is the non-teaching part of the classes, which means like, well, before every exam, there's like 20 people that have various problems, and then they're sick and this and that, and then you have to find some other time for them to do the exam, uh, or so I don't like logistical problems related to classes. Or if the test is online, then 50 people have some internet connection problem, and that will create a headache. Uh, yeah, but I like the teaching part that is teaching. That is, you are there and you say things and you interact with the students. Yeah, and I also like the part where it's fewer students because the bigger class at 300, which is too many students. But in settings where there's fewer of them, then you can have more interactions and know some people more closely. So I like that part. And in the lab part, I like the uh, discussing a lot when some initial discovery was found that you can see would be very important and interesting. So that part is also very fun. Or I like how kind of making the figures for the papers. And then I like the writing the paper too. Yeah, and the part of the research that I don't like is the part that's not research exactly, but it is like you have to write a report about how the chemicals are being disposed, or um, so there's a lot of bureaucracy paperwork related to the research. So yeah, I don't like those.
Do you have any other hobbies other than neuroscience?
Yeah, I play guitar and I paint.
Like, do you think it is important as a student or as a people who is in academia, like they should have some other hobbies and like?
I yes, also play chess.
Oh, I also basically play chess.
Yeah, but the chess I should play less. It's very addictive.
Yeah, but it's fun.
It's just it is fun.
Mm,
Yeah, so I would say it's good to have hobbies that are not chess,
okay.
other activities.
So, like, do you like music and stuff?
Yeah, play guitar and I like listening to music.
Just to lighten up the mood at the end, like, do you have like, would you like to suggest any particular song that I should try out?
Yeah, so my favorite band is the Beatles. So I think a lot of their uh, later songs uh, towards the late '60s were very beautiful. Like "Here Comes the Sun" is a very beautiful song. If you don't know it,
Um, okay, so this is the end of our interview, and
okay, thank you.
thank you so much